We've been seeing things heat up in the news for years now, and the Trump administration has only heightened media tensions. We know that different news sources have different opinions, sometimes even on the same story. The left wing hates Fox News for their views, while the right wing loves to call CNN and other sources fake news. Among these sources, we can see a strong political divide. This is not only in what stories they cover, but how they choose to approach them. Here's a few examples of how politically opposing news sources covering the same issues with very different perspectives, and more importantly, how this media divide can affect us as individuals and as a society. In 2017, Hurricane Maria left Puerto Rico in ruins. The following year, news sources were still talking about the storm and the United States response. Among these was Fox News, and their article singing praise of Trump's response to the storm. The story starts off with quotes from Trump calling Puerto Rico probably the hardest, but still incredibly successful, and the best job we did. A few paragraphs of this article focus on Trump's pride regarding the response efforts, and then it takes a turn to cover some backlash from the governor of Puerto Rico and multiple Democratic lawmakers. The article shows these criticisms, but it doesn't offer any further commentary on them. It ends with a quote from Trump saying that the United States is totally prepared for Hurricane Florence that was set to hit the states in the following months. The article did not include many details regarding the response to Hurricane Maria or any relief efforts from Trump's administration. Instead, it focused on Trump's declarations of pride and success and the following criticisms from Democrats and the Puerto Rican governor. The Washington Post released their own article around the same time as Fox News, but it has a very different view. The article focuses on a video of Trump throwing paper towel into a crowd of Puerto Ricans following the devastation of the storm. They explain that the incident seemed lighthearted at the time to the White House aides who were there, but looking back with the hindsight of the storm's lethality, it seems insensitive and lacking empathy. It was also noted that Trump only visited the better fortified neighborhoods of the capital and far from the most catastrophic destruction, something that's not clear from the video itself, but gives more information about Trump's visit to the island. The article includes quotes from many critics to display in contrast to quotes of Trump boasting his success, taking the position that Trump is not being honest in these claims and should not be proud of his response to the storm. They also compare him to Bush, announcing mission complete far before the war was over, adding on to their argument that his pride is misplaced. This article focuses on specific actions of the president and contrasts them to what he has said, using outside quotes from Democrats and Puerto Ricans to amplify their disappointment. Fox News also posted one article focusing specifically on the paper towel tossing, but they framed it around the media's response rather than his actions. It mentions comments that Trump was not showing the proper degree of empathy, but retorts these complaints, saying that it's not his style. It continued on to say that the media wasn't giving proper attention to the devastation in Puerto Rico until they discovered a way to turn the situation against Trump with the paper towel video. The article wraps up by saying that he delivered a beautiful speech, but that it was overshadowed by a short video because it fit the narrative. These articles all focused on Trump's response to the devastation in Puerto Rico, but they chose different actions to push their agenda, both selecting some details to focus on while leaving others out. Another more recent topic that has been covered very differently across various news sources is the Black Lives Matter movement, protests, and riots in response to the death of George Floyd. Trump took a public walk to St. John's Cathedral in Washington, D.C., where he held a Bible and posed for pictures. PJ Media, a conservative news source, published an article praising his walk to the church and the symbology of holding a Bible. The article mentions how he led the walk to the church and picked up the Bible, making a point to say that these actions were his own idea. It is also mentioned that the Bishop of D.C. was upset about Trump's actions, and this discontent and anger is mocked, saying that her response was unfounded and she simply doesn't like Trump. In response to one man on Twitter pointing out that Trump wasn't wearing a mask, the author calls rioters terrorists and said that they should have worn masks too. The article ends by calling Trump's walk a lovely gesture to people of faith and show of force to those who are sick of the devastation by these thugs. This article is clearly taking a pro-Trump, anti-rioter, and protester stance and using his walk to the church to showcase these opinions. CNN, a source constantly targeted by Trump as false news, published their own article regarding the church photo op. However, they use the article to question his motives for the trip to the church. The article mentions that protesters were gassed and forcibly removed from the area before Trump went to the church, identifying these actions as unacceptable. The article mostly focuses on the outrage of some Christians who saw him misusing the Bible for publicity, rather than opening it and reading from it. The stance they are taking is that Trump was being disrespectful and insincere in this walk, simply using Christianity as a prop to gain support. They also call him out for rarely going to church, implying that his faith is not strong enough for this photo op to seem genuine. Both of these sources covered his walk to the church, but chose different background information to set the context for their analysis of his behavior, like the violence of the rioters or the religious beliefs of Trump. The differences in these articles show how the media sets the agenda for national politics. Agenda setting is how political figures, the media, and other public actors decide which issues are the most central to public focus and discussion. It has even been called one of the most central processes in any political system, because it decides what is talked about and how it is talked about. Agenda setting has evolved from just deciding which issues to focus on, but also how to feel about public figures like politicians, as we can see in these articles about Trump and his actions. This shows that agenda setting has moved on from not just what to think about, but also how to think about it. We can see, especially recently, that different media sources push different agendas. The Washington Post and CNN show clear disdain for Trump and his actions, while Fox News and PJ News both praise Trump for his words. They focus on different actions to push these agendas and paint these opinions of public figures. For example, in the articles that we looked at, Fox News liked that Trump went to Puerto Rico and thought that we should praise him for it, whereas the Washington Post only mentioned that he went to nicer neighborhoods, making it seem that we should not support him for these actions. Different sources can also look at the same actions, but interpret them differently. In our examples, PJ News said that Trump holding the Bible was a lovely gesture, while CNN included a quote saying that it was a crime against God. We can see just from this handful of articles that we looked at that different media sources can choose which actions they talk about and how they talk about them to shape the public agenda and how we think about public figures and public issues. This agenda setting of the media can add to or change the terministic screens of their viewers. Burke describes terministic screens as vocabularies through which we see the world. These perspectives cannot be all-encompassing, so they're suited to every person based on their beliefs for their needs. Everyone is looking at things through different screens based on the situation that they are in. Screens are influenced by all sorts of life events and biases, and the news we consume can create the screen through which we see politics. If we consume only sources like Fox News and PJ News, we're more likely to support Trump and demonize the media, as we can see from the examples that we looked at. At the same time, if we consume only Washington Post and CNN, we're more likely to disapprove of Trump and his actions, as we can see from their articles that we looked at. This is not to say that we can't form our own opinions and that we're taking away our autonomy, but rather it's that our opinions and perspectives are influenced by the screens through which we interpret the news and the world. Differences in screens are caused by differences in knowledge or information diversity, and we rarely accept that we have our own screens, preferring to think that we ourselves have an unbiased reality. These screens and our unawareness of them make civil discussion difficult and common ground hard to find. We can see through these examples how news media set the public agenda by choosing different events to cover or covering the same events under a different light. This agenda setting identifies the central issues of the day along with the proper opinions on central political figures. The news, and therefore the agendas that we consume, influence the screens through which we see the world. We're usually unaware of our own screens and fast to see those of others, making civil discussion about politics difficult. This divisiveness can be seen across the country and is only fed by the varying perspectives that the news media embody and force upon us. Escaping our echo chambers and becoming aware of our own screens can help reduce this political division and help to find a common ground between the agendas being set. This can make us a more inclusive society that's more likely to work together and cooperate, rather than the divisive society that we are seeing today,